Welcome back to Books with Duddy. Today we are going to discuss Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So it wasn't a book I had really any idea of what it was about kind of going into it other than, the short description. I thought it was just a fantasy book. I didn't know that the romance aspect would be a big part of it, but let's talk about it. So we will start by doing a spoiler-free review where I kind of talk about the writing style, some of the things I liked, didn't like, a few of the non-spoiler characters, and then if you're looking for a discussion of the book that includes spoilers, including talking about the ending and going more in depth about the characters and the story and all that, check out the linked video. We'll get started with the spoiler-free review. So, if you don't know about this book, it is a book about Violet. She has basically grown up her entire life to be a scribe, someone who deals with history and the books and archives and all those types of things. But her mother, who is a very high-ranking general in the army, forces her to basically change occupations and attempt to become a dragon rider. Attempting to become a dragon rider is dangerous, and most people have trained their entire life for it, but Violet is just kind of thrown in there. And that's where our book starts. So one of the things with this being a fantasy setting, as far as the writing style goes, I don't mind being drowned in tons of lore and all of that kind of stuff. But I think probably what makes this book or this series pretty popular, one of the things at least, is it's not overly heavy on the lore. I mean, there is lore, but it's not just constantly being thrown at you, it felt like. Which again, I don't mind if lore is, but I think, for a lot of people that can get kind of boring. So with that said, I still really liked the world building of the book. Just the way that things were set up with the borders of the countries and outposts and cities and all of that kind of stuff. It was still, enough to get a good idea on how the world works. So I enjoyed that. So I guess I'll also talk a little bit, like I mentioned at the beginning, I didn't know that this book was a fantasy romance, I guess, or genre or whatever. And for me, that's not super my cup of tea. I didn't mind it for most of the book, because it was always there in the book, but I felt like I was always more interested in other things that were going on. But I would say the romance really ramps up later in the book, the romance aspect, and it was a little bit much for me. I like the Twilight movies, but other than that, I don't. And I like romantic comedies and stuff like that. But as far as books go, just not something I would typically pick to read. With that said, I mean, you'll hear my rating at the end, but I think, it's just something to be aware of that, at least for someone who is not normally reading romance books, it was heavy on the romance and the graphic nature of where romances can go. But I really enjoyed the pacing of this book. It's not like a super long book, but it's definitely not short either. But you were constantly looking forward to. There was always constantly something that you knew was coming up that was dangerous and like a life or death scenario. So things kept moving throughout the book, and like I said, there's just always something that you were looking forward to and waiting to that you wanted to get to. The chapters were a little bit long for my liking, but it wasn't too bad. Now, as far as characters go, for non-spoilers, Violet, who's our protagonist, I really like Violet a lot. I think she's 20 years old, so somewhere around there. Like, I think early 20s. So there's definitely some, growing up and things that happen. And I think in general, all the characters in the book are around like early 20s. And sometimes it does feel like they're a little bit immature for that age. But then again, they live in a different world than we do. So, their ideas on what's mature and, what's not, kind of differ from ours. So, but just looking from my perspective, there was points where it was like, oof, yeah, I was like that when I was like, 17 or 18. But overall, she's a really easy character to root for. Yeah, she was a really good protagonist. There's multiple love interests. I'll leave those unnamed, but the other characters that I just want to touch on are some of her like supporting characters, her friends that she meets when attempting to become a dragon rider. And I really like these characters. There was some depth to them. They were likable. Most of them were likable in their own ways. But they all had kind of like different backgrounds, and I would have even liked to gotten to know more about their backgrounds, but I did enjoy the supporting cast quite a bit. So not much on the characters because like I've said in the past, I'm pretty anti-spoiler, but I did like a lot of the characters in the book, and there was a lot of nuance and depth to them. So as far as my rating goes, I am going to give this book a 6.8 out of 10. You'll see my rating scale up there. I can see why somebody would rate this a lot higher if they were very into the romance aspect. I wasn't super into the whole romance thing, the whole book, but like I said, it was kind of taking a back seat to a lot of the other stuff that was happening, at least in my mind, till, near the end of the book when, it got a little bit more hot and heavy. So if you're into that thing, I could see why you would rate this a lot higher. For me, yeah, that I would have been already into the next book without that stuff, and I'm kind of torn on whether I want to read the next book or not. Not for the fantasy aspect of the story, but because I really enjoyed that, and the end of the book, definitely there's some things that happen that it's like, whoa, I really want to know what happens next. Yeah, I'm kind of undecided there, so if y'all want me to read the next book, let me know in the comments. But yeah, I'll give this book a 6.8 out of 10. Definitely worth a shot, especially if you're into fantasy or romance and fantasy romance and all that. Okay, well, thank you for watching this review of The Fourth Wing. Let me know in the comments what you all thought about the book. If you've watched this long, I appreciate it. If you leave a like and a subscribe, I would very much appreciate that. Otherwise, I hope to see you soon.